Yes, security may be the biggest talking point in Nigeria, but if you were to check that list, top 5 would be the tax reforms set to kick off on January the 1st, 2026. But just some days ago, a lawmaker on the floor of the House of Representatives raised concerns, and he alleged that what they passed in the National Assembly is different from what the president signed and gazetted, and that is a major talking point in Nigeria today. Some are saying, is this budget padding, except that it's not a budget, it's the tax law? How do we describe it? What exactly is going on? Well, there's an investigation ongoing right now, but we have to touch base with one of the brilliant minds who has championed this year in, year out, even from before he got the position. We have joining us on the program the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, joins us virtually on the program today. Mr. Oyedele, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Kayode.
Well, Mr. Oyedele, I'm sure you've seen that video by Honorable Abdulsamad Dasuki, PDP Sokoto, where he raised the matter of privilege on the floor of the House, alleging discrepancies between the tax laws passed by the National Assembly and the version subsequently gazetted and made available to the public. But before we get right into it, I wanted you to help us understand the role you played, just to reiterate yet again, because lawmaking is like factory work. There are those who get the raw materials, there are those who operate the machine, there are those who mix the product together, there are those who certify to be sure that, oh, this product is fit, there are those who package it, and then we talk about marketing. So in this whole chain, what was your role? Let's contextualize it, then we'll get into the controversies.
Thank you very much, Kayode. So you're right. I think when it comes to matters of legislation, particularly tax matters, trust is very important because taxation in particular is at the heart of the social contract between the people and the government. But to answer your question directly, my role is the privilege to lead a team of very patriotic Nigerians from all walks of life. I've said this a number of times. At a point, we were more than 100 in trying to look at our tax system to see what's wrong with it, and that's a lot of things are wrong, and then to see how do we address those issues with one objective: to make Nigeria better for everyone. So while I'll be the one, speaking for the committee, this is a teamwork that we have been doing for the past 2.5 years. And I'm really proud of the team and their commitment. Now, what role have we played? So we were the team that drafted the bills. And while we're drafting the bills, we created this very rigorous process with the understanding that we've seen instances in Nigeria where, there are different versions of a bill. But I remember when they were doing the petroleum industry bill before it was enacted, there was a lawmaker who said, we're not even sure which version we're discussing. We had this very rigorous process to guarantee the integrity of that bill. Of course, went through the internal processes. Mr. President presented it to the National Assembly, and from that point forward, our role was really more about just trying to explain the thinking behind those different provisions in the law, which many people followed. Now, once that was done, bear in mind as well that the legislative process is quite rigorous and elaborate. So there was the House Committee on Finance that did their work. There was the Senate Committee on Finance that did their work. And where necessary, they asked us for explanation of what they were doing, and then they passed their own versions. Now, because those two versions were not the same, they had to harmonize. And once they harmonized and sent it to Mr. President, my role in particular was about looking at what they've asked Mr. President to sign and identify whether there are major or substantial changes to the policy issues. You want to do tax harmonization, you want to reduce the taxes on businesses, you want to eliminate tax on low-income earners. Those policy issues, all right, were the areas of my focus, such that you want to get to a point where you're saying to yourself, has anything in terms of the policy direction been substantially altered as to warrant the president withholding assent? Now, after that was done, and the law was being gazetted, and I use the word advisedly, being gazetted, we were still very interested in ensuring that the editing issues, referencing, numbering, definitional problems were properly done. And many people will be aware who are watching us that there was a first draft, let me call it first draft of the Gazette that actually went out. Somebody released it when they were not authorized, where we saw some mistakes. And we escalated those mistakes, and many of those corrections were indeed made before we now have what is the final Gazette of the tax law. So essentially, in a nutshell, that is the role that I have played along with my committee members.
All right, so Mr. Oyedele, let's get right into it. The particular sections in the law that are being said to be changed or have been changed, we want to look at them and want to ask you, is this what was passed? We'll start with the Nigeria Revenue Service Act, Section 25 on accounts and audit. It says the service shall keep proper accounts and records, and such accounts shall not later than 6 months after the end of each year be audited by auditors appointed by the board from the list and in accordance with the guidelines supplied by the Auditor General of the Federation. Now, that's what is in the gazetted law. That's the Nigeria Revenue Service Act. Also, 26 is also in contention. This is gazetted, Mr. Oyedele. Is this what was passed?
Yeah, let me help to make some very important clarifications. So generally, before you can say that there's a difference between what was gazetted and what was passed, we have what is gazetted, we don't have what was passed. So the official harmonized bills certified by the clerk, which the National Assembly sent to the president, we don't have the copy to compare, right? That's a fundamental issue that people need to be aware of. So only the lawmakers can say authoritatively, this is what we sent. And that what we sent, shouldn't be the House of Rep version, it shouldn't be the Senate version, it should be the harmonized version certified by the clerk. So even me, I can't say that I have it, right? Because I don't. I only just have what was presented to Mr. President to sign. The second important point, which will help our audience, is that what has been circulating and also widely reported by a lot of media organizations is actually, fake. So when I saw those things, you would imagine someone like me would take very keen interest, in something like that. So I reached out to one of the members of the committee that the House of Reps set up, and I said, these are some of the allegations. Let me even tell you the reason why I reached out. There's a reference in one of those materials to one section 41 subsection 8 that says you have to pay a deposit of 20%. And I know that particular provision is not in the final gazette, but it was in the draft gazette. So I reached out and the lawmaker said that they haven't even met. So some people decided they should write the report of the committee before the committee has met, and it has circulated everywhere. So I don't know whether it's useful, because to be honest, I don't want to speculate. What is out there in the media did not come from the committee set up by the House of Reps, and I think we should allow them do the investigation, because ultimately, I think this is not just about the tax reform laws. It's about our processes. How can we make those processes have those quality assurance? Almost like, a system that is so tamper-proof, like the way you print your currency or the way you print the ballot box, ballot papers. That's the way we should take legislation. It matters a lot. I was speaking to a senior advocate who said to me that they went to court and tried to defend their client on something constitutional. So they were reading the Constitution and they just say, but there is this section you are reading, it's not the same as what another person has. Even the Constitution people print different versions. We saw it with PIA. We saw it with even KAMA. So I think I'll leave it at that point. Let's wait for the findings. of the lawmakers, if indeed there were alterations, and if those alterations were substantial, in other words, they're not editorial, then the next step would be to see how best to address those issues.
So let's get to try to understand Honorable Abdulsamad Dasuki's position within the context of the inner workings of administrative processes of government. And when I say government now, the legislative and the executive arms of government. I'm drawing attention to this, with reference to the signing of the bill into law by Mr. President, which was under the watchful eyes of, I believe, the Senate President and other officials of the National Assembly. So, and I believe you were also there because it was, the story made headlines when the bill was signed into law. So what could have led to the alleged discrepancies? Because what the implications of what Honorable Dasuki is saying are quite huge. They are not administrative errors, going by what Kayode has read out from the law that was signed, but have huge implications if indeed there are discrepancies. So who should we be calling out with respect to the administrative processes between the legislative and the executive arms of government over this reported discrepancy?
Yeah, thank you, Bukola. I'll be very honest with you. I do not think that this is a legislative versus executive conversation. I do not think that's what it is. I think it's a process and a system issue that has to be addressed. And I don't think it's about finger pointing and looking for who to blame. Like what I said is, if you think about the process today, there's a lot of stages with manual hands-offs that anything can go wrong. So when you sit to discuss changes to the law as lawmakers, there's someone who is making notes who needs to go and update. You need to ensure that they're updating what they have been asked to. You finish that with House of Rep, you do almost the same thing for Senate, and then you harmonize, and then you also need people to update. And then you certify it, you send it, usually through the Ministry of Justice to go to Mr. President for assent. And once it's been signed, you will notice that the version that the President signs is a different format. You have to then put it in their gazetting formats, which is also done, manually. And then that's sending from the President after assent for gazetting goes to Ministry of Information. Now, these different stages do not have the level of quality assurance that can make sure that these things never happen, not only for the tax bills, but for going forward. So which is why my preference is maybe we shouldn't waste this crisis, if you call it a crisis, and use it as an opportunity not only to identify if anything had gone wrong in this case that is substantial, address them, but more importantly, to strengthen that process going forward, so that when we have laws, we know that these laws have not been tampered with in any way, form, or shape. And by the way, you said when the laws were being signed, and I've heard this also, the Senate President was there, the Speaker was there, but if you are there when they're signing the law, you can't read 400 pages just because you're there. There's a process for finding out, the content of that. So I wouldn't say just the fact that the lawmakers were there and I was there meant that everybody confirmed that everything was fine. The same way I wouldn't say that, it wasn't fine, which is why I said let's wait for the outcome of the investigation.
The argument is to whether there were modifications, removals, omissions in the gazetted, as you've explained from your position as to what you think it is and how we must seize this opportunity. Because we know that legislative powers resides purely with the National Assembly according to Section 4 and Section 58 of the Constitution. So except there are clerical errors and all of that, which are even has to go through the National Assembly. Now, there are people that are calling, without going to some specifics, there are people that are calling for a suspension of implementation to avoid a bit of chaos on January the 1st. Is that a valid call from where you sit?
Yeah, so I think, I'll also tell you that even before this alleged alteration issue came up, there are people who have been calling for suspension. There are people who have been saying no to the reform, we cannot do it for whatever reasons. The biggest issue we've had to deal with and that we're still dealing with has been misinformation. Now, if you speak to the legal provisions and who has the powers, even if we want to postpone the implementation of the law, it has to be the lawmakers. That's far beyond my pay grade. So that decision has to be made, and I believe that decision for them will be a function of what their findings from this investigation reveal. But just to put it very clearly to the Nigerian people, what some people have done is to have recruited unsuspecting Nigerians to fight the reform that is meant to benefit the generality of the people, and by creating fear. So what is the cost of delay? What is the cost of not going ahead 1st of January? What is the cost of suspending it or not going ahead with the reform? It will mean simply that we continue with the status quo, which is that the bottom 98% of workers remain overtaxed. Small businesses miss out on exemptions, so they continue to pay multiple taxes and high tax burden. Large firms continue with their multiple and nuisance taxes, right? Minimum taxes continue to apply on low-income earners and small businesses and on profitable businesses. Hidden VAT continue to make the prices of basic consumption like food, healthcare, and education to go up. And then the wasteful, distortionary incentive that we have that is distorting the economy will continue. So we need to be clear about what we're asking for. That's why I keep saying that even if it's established that there have been substantial alterations to what the National Assembly passed, my view would be identify those provisions, and those provisions, of course, mean they're not part of the law. So you then go ahead and implement the law as passed by the National Assembly while you address those issues as to how did they get in there and what should we do. I'll say to you, even just looking at the things that were passed by the National Assembly, the areas where even my committee, we've noted areas where we need to go back, of course, through Mr. President, to request for amendment to those laws, because there were issues to do with referencing, issues of definition. You may be aware, like small business, for example, is defined in two of the new laws, and the definition is different. So like if you are defining a small business, why don't you just define it in one way so people are not confused? So those issues already require some intervention from the lawmakers. And for us, we'll be taking advantage of this process, depending on what the lawmakers decide, to then make those corrections.
Right. So it's quite intriguing to see the developments from the very beginning, issues around VAT, around derivation, and all of that. This has been one exhausting procedure, really. So I see a lot of businesses that are already marking up for next year's budgeting. So when they say, okay, do a budget for this for next year, they add to it because there's a lot of uncertainty for them. A lot of people think it's going to be some sort of an Armageddon. So they are preparing for the worst, marking up just to sort of have a buffer in case things go awry. Maybe you also want to speak to those businesses. I mean, we're following the outcome of this investigation, but there are a lot of people, as I said, who are already marking up because they're thinking, we don't know what will happen if we're already charging VAT, consumption tax already 15%. Some are even adding to it thinking, we might even need to do 20% next year. I want you to speak to that as well, because I see it as a trend. And if you've seen budgets for next year, Mr. Oyedele, it's almost unholy at this point.
Very important question, Kayode. And I see this a lot. And sometimes for me, it's just so heartbreaking. You know, one of my friends, you know, who is a director at the NESD, you know, called me, I think it was last weekend or maybe 2 weeks ago. He wanted to make a dress and went to the tailor. And the tailor gave a price that he considered was too high. So he just concluded it must be to do with year-end and Christmas. You have too many demands. You don't have time for me. And he said to the tailor, I'll wait because I'm not pressed for time. I'll come back in January and make my dress when the price will be reasonable. Guess what the tailor said? He said, don't wait till January because the price will go up even further. And he said, why? He said tax reform. So the next question was, which part of the tax reform? Of course, the tailor has no idea. But in his mind, he's been sold this narrative that this tax reform will make things go up, and he's already planning to add price to what he's doing. This is so dangerous and unfair to the system. This tax reform law has been designed to bring down costs for businesses. Businesses will be getting input credit for VAT on their assets, on their overhead that they never got before. This is worth 3.4 trillion naira, just based on 2024 tax collection. Large businesses will see a drop in their corporate tax rate from 30% to 25%. 98% of workers in the private and public sector combined would either no longer pay PAYE or they will pay less than they were paying before. Small businesses, up to 100 million turnover a year, will not pay corporate tax, no VAT, no withholding tax. The narrative we should be saying is that we expect prices to come down, not to give people the excuse to raise prices. I don't know how else we can convince ourselves that what we are doing now, many of us, is not helping us. We pray for a better society. We want a country that can at least take care of all of us. And then when we have reforms to do exactly that, we spin it and change it to a negative reform such that people are now even afraid of it. You know, interestingly, some of the things they've used to sell the misinformation and create fear and panic are in the current tax laws in a worse form. The current tax law requires you to provide tax ID. It gives the taxman the power to collect information from your bank. It has multiple taxation for individuals. So all the things that people are afraid of are in worse form in the current law. Many of those taxes have been removed under the new one. There's no consumption tax of 15 or 20% because they're being harmonized. Let me even give you another good news. Part of what we did to address multiple taxation, many people remember subsidy is gone as day one speech of Mr. President. That same day, he addressed the issue of multiple taxation and says we must fix the problem. In this new tax law, many of those multiple taxations have been eliminated to the extent that they are not conflicting with the Constitution. We've also written to the National Assembly proposals to address where we have nuisance taxes in the Constitution, and that is making good progress, and we are grateful to the lawmakers. The third aspect of it is subnational. So we have state now, we work with Joint Revenue Board, and drafted a tax harmonization law for the state to enact for themselves and their local government. Good news, as I speak to you now, Ekiti State, Anambra State, Zamfara State, and Kano State have passed those laws. They're just waiting to sign. Imagine that we get to a point where all the states have enacted laws to harmonize all this multiple taxation, outlaw cash collection, so that you also block the leakages. It's a win-win for the system, and we should not stall that process for any reason.
Help us understand also the concerns over increase in personal income tax for, of course, for those who earn above 1 million naira contained in the new tax laws. What implications will that have on the what we call now the middle class that is gradually being eliminated?
Yeah, Bukola, let me just tell you, this is also one of the biggest misinformation. If anybody is earning, 2 million naira or less a month, this new tax law from next year eliminates either their PAYE completely for the lowest income earners, or it reduces what they earn. So I'm talking about like 20 million naira a year will see a drop. So the people that will pay, people just go to the tax table and they say, oh, if it's above 800,000, it's 15%. That's not how the system works. The way it works, there's a distinction between what we call gross income and taxable income. So the salary that they pay you or they agree to pay you for your employment is called gross salary or gross income. What you have in the tax table is called taxable income. They're not the same. You take the gross income and you start by making statutory deductions, pension contribution, National Housing Fund, National Health Insurance Scheme, if you have an insurance policy on your life and your spouse, and mortgage interest. When you're done with that, you also take out rent relief allowance up to 500,000. It is the balance after that process that is called taxable income. The first 800,000 is also 0%. So what we are saying is this: a low-income earner or an average person, middle class, who is earning 1.5, 1.8 million per month, will see a drop in their PAYE from January next year. We've done a calculator just because of this misinformation was all over the place. If anybody is interested, they can go to fiscalreforms.ng. Fiscal is FISCAL, reforms.ng. They will find a tax calculator there, put in their numbers. It will tell you the tax you pay currently. It will tell you the tax you pay under the new law, and it shows you the comparison whether you are paying more or less. Only the top 2% of earners in Nigeria will pay more. And even that more is marginal for the majority of them. Before you get to 25% tax rate in Nigeria, you need to be earning $1 billion naira a year. And I say this with all seriousness. Even when you earn 200 million naira a year, you don't hit the 25%. So all of these, and the people that even pay a little bit more, are mostly top executives or business owners. Guess what? If they are paying 1 million naira more in personal tax, their businesses is getting 10 million naira more under this new reform, which means even for the high net worth individuals, this is a win for everyone. I do not see any stakeholder that is worse off under this reform than the current system.
All right, Ms. Oyedele, maybe I'll also, in a lighter note, tell you to welcome to the world of politics. Politics of taxation is what you're dealing with. So the more you explain, the more you need to keep explaining. But a little scenario for you to help out here. Let's give an example. Baba Bayo in, say, Shisha, in Surulere, is a vulcanizer. He earns, say, 10,000 naira. Let's just average that, 10,000 naira daily. It's just for hypothetical reasons. And he works 6 days a week. That comes about 60,000. So if you do that, by a month, we're talking about 240,000. If you do that by monthly, yes, 240,000. So if you do that annually, you're ranging around 2.8 million. So Baba Bayo doesn't have, that his business is not registered, but he has a bank account that he puts his money through whenever he's being paid. 2.8 million comes to his account, even if he started with just 10,000 naira daily for 6 days. What does the taxman see in his account? What would the taxman do with that kind of money that passes through his account?
Yeah, God bless you, Jeffrey, for this question. I'm so glad you asked and the way you analyzed it. So for Baba Bayo, what that will mean is at the end of the year, remember that amount that Baba Bayo is making is not money that it's not his money. You know, I don't know how to put it. That is the revenue from his business. This Baba Bayo will buy different things. Will pay for diesel to make sure that the vulcanizing machine is working. He will pay for the staff trying to carry the whatever it is they used to pump it around. He's probably paying something for even using the space where he's doing the vulcanizing work. So there's a draft regulation we have worked on with the Joint Revenue Board. It's called presumptive tax. In fact, the threshold we're working with is anybody earning up to like 40,000 naira a day from their business. So this is not salary. That the amount of profit that they make is so small, they shouldn't have to pay tax at all. So our plan is for those people to be completely exempted. So like Baba Bayo in your instance, we not pay tax from next year if we succeed with all of this reform, because Baba Bayo's margin is so small. If he was in the private sector working as an employee, he will be exempted. Why do we punish people who are trying to then create jobs, or they're just hustling? So under that presumptive tax, in fact, we even identify some businesses where we want government to give them tax exemption stickers. Like somebody is roasting corn by the roadside, they can never make enough money to pay tax. Vulcanizer, how can they make enough money to pay tax? Cart pushers. So there's some businesses that if you have customers 24 hours a day and you're magically not able to sleep and continue to function, you'll still be a poor person. We don't want to leave that judgment as to whether they pay tax or not to the ordinary officer that can, decide to make a different decision. We want to protect them. That's what this reform is all about. So the fact that that money is in the account of Baba Bayo, nobody, and that's why the threshold for even reporting Under this new reform, threshold for reporting is 25 million naira a quarter. That means you need to have like 100 million moving around in your accounts before the taxman will even take an interest. Under the current law, there's no threshold. They can ask anybody to report anything. So again, Baba Bayo is safe, and so is everyone else. Even if you have a billion naira in that your bank account and they report it to the taxman, nobody can debit your account. At best, you'll say you have 1 billion in your account. We have not seen your tax returns. Please, can you explain, is it like a loan or a gift? And then you explain yourself. If your explanation doesn't look tenable and there's no evidence, taxman will say, I take it that because there's 1 billion flowing through your account, we think is your income, and your tax is 50 million naira. You still have 30 days to object to that assessment to say, I'm not going to pay 30 million. Then that back and forth continues until the taxman says, I refuse to amend. And then that gives you the opportunity now to appeal. You go to tax appeal tribunal, you go to the High Court, you go to Court of Appeal, you go to the Supreme Court. So obviously, you know that this power is not what the taxman will use for when there's 1 million tax to collect, because the process will not justify it. And even when there's a lot of money to collect, there's a due process in the law to be followed. And if anybody is trying to harass you, good news. Under the new tax reform law, there's a tax ombudsman to protect you. That we do not have today.
Well, Mr. Oyedele, this has shed a lot of light on the issues, but I must say that this conversation continues naturally. As much as we wish you happy holidays, we might call you anytime, but we appreciate that you always answer. And just to reiterate, for those who want to calculate just how much tax they will be paying or they were paying, you go to that website, fiscalreforms.ng. You see the hamburger menu, which is like 3 horizontal lines. When you click on it, you go to implementation. You see implementation. When you scroll down, you'll see that calculator right there, and you can use the calculator to find out. So, Baba Bayo, Mama Comforts, Ogene, Abdullahi, please, let's go there and find out, and of course follow this conversation and investigations. Mr. Oyedele, thank you for your time. Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.